The cop had his hand on his holster before I could finish turning around. "Don't move," he said. "Hands where I can see them." I raised both hands slowly, the way your father teaches you, not with pride but with the quiet gravity of survival. And I looked at Officer Daniels, badge number 4471, standing in the marble lobby of my building, and I thought, he has absolutely no idea. 3 minutes later, he would. And for the rest of his career, he would wish he had never walked through those glass doors. But let me take you back to the beginning, because the beginning is where you understand why that lobby, that morning, felt like the moment my entire life had been quietly building toward. My name is Marcus Webb. I am 42 years old. I grew up on the east side of Detroit, in a 2-bedroom apartment with my mother, my grandmother, and a rotating cast of aunts who all believed that hard work was the only honest currency in the world. My mother cleaned offices. My grandmother had cleaned offices before her. I grew up watching them leave before dawn and come home after dark, smelling of lemon disinfectant and floor wax, and I made them a silent promise, not the kind you announce at dinner tables, just a quiet, cellular-level vow that I would build something real, something that could not be taken away with a phone call or a mood or a whim. I became an architect, then a developer. It took 20 years, 3 failed partnerships, 1 bankruptcy that nearly broke me in 2011, and more 14-hour days than I can count. By 40, I owned 2 commercial properties in the city. Last spring, I closed on a third, a 12-story mixed-use building in the heart of downtown, glass and gray sandstone, 84 residential units above 6 floors of retail and office space. The marble floor in that lobby was gray-veined white, imported from Portugal. The reception desk was dark walnut, custom-built. The ceiling was 18 feet high, with recessed lighting I had personally specified down to the color temperature. Every inch of that building was a decision I had made, a problem I had solved, a fight I had won. I loved that building the way some people love their children, fiercely, quietly, with a gravity that probably looked like arrogance from the outside. That Tuesday morning in March, I arrived at 7:43 a.m., running late after a call with my contractor about a plumbing issue on the 9th floor. I had parked 2 blocks away and walked fast, collar up against a cold that still had January in it, despite the calendar. I was carrying blueprints under my left arm and a coffee from the place on Meridian Street. I was thinking about the plumbing, about a lease negotiation with a restaurant group. I was not thinking about trouble, because why would I be? I was walking into my own building. The lobby was quiet. Carlos Dominguez, my building manager, wasn't at his desk. He was in the parking garage handling a fender bender between 2 residents. The lobby was staffed by Tyler, a temporary security guard who had started 4 days prior and was maybe 23. And standing near the reception desk, arms folded, was a police officer I had never seen before. Heavyset, pink-faced, with the settled expression of a man who believed he performed a public service simply by existing in a space. His name tag read, Daniels. I had taken perhaps 4 steps across the marble floor when he looked up. The change in his face was immediate and not subtle. The swift recalibration of a certain type of person encountering a black man in an upscale interior before the man has had any chance to identify himself. His posture shifted. His chin came up. His eyes moved from my face to the blueprints to my coffee, and in 2 seconds he had made a decision about me. "Hey," he said, "can I help you?" The phrasing was superficially polite. The tone underneath it was not. "Good morning," I said. I kept walking toward the elevator bank. "Sir," his voice sharpened, "I'm talking to you. Can I help you with something?" I stopped and turned. I had been in this exact situation before. Not in this building, but in lobbies, parking structures, conference rooms, hardware stores where I was clearly the customer and somehow still the suspect. I knew the shape of what was happening. I also knew, with a calm I had spent years developing, exactly how it was going to end. "I'm going up to the 9th floor," I said. "Plumbing issue I need to look at." He took a deliberate step toward me. "Do you live here?" "I have business here." "What kind of business?" Behind him, Tyler had gone perfectly still, hands flat on the desk, watching us both with the expression of someone who understood something was wrong, but couldn't locate it precisely enough to act. "I'm a developer," I said. "Meeting with my contractor on 9. "Your contractor?" He repeated it slowly, with heavy skepticism, as if replaying a story that didn't quite add up. "Does your contractor know you're coming?" "He does, because I called him 22 minutes ago." Daniels moved another step closer, close enough that I could see the coffee stain on his collar and the red in the capillaries of his nose. He looked at me the way certain men have looked at men like me across centuries of lobbies and doorways and street corners. Not with pure hatred necessarily, but with a settled institutional certainty that whatever space I occupied, I hadn't earned the right to occupy it without accounting for myself first. "I'm going to need to see some ID," he said. The recessed lights hummed above us. The marble floor was cold underfoot, even through my shoes. I set my coffee on the edge of the reception desk. Tyler flinched at the sound, and said completely evenly, "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that I'm a police officer and I'm asking." "And that isn't a lawful basis for an ID demand in this state," I said. "As I'm sure you're aware." Something moved across his face, the sharp irritation of a man who had expected reflexive compliance and received calm instead. His right hand dropped to his belt, not quite to the holster but close enough that the gesture could not be misread. "Sir," he said, voice flat and cold, "I can have you removed from this building for trespassing right now if you refuse to cooperate. One more time. ID. Now." I looked at him for a long moment. The lobby was silent except for the building's low ambient hum and the sound of blood moving in my own ears. I thought, briefly and involuntarily, about my mother leaving before sunrise, keys already in hand, uniform already pressed. I thought about 2011, sitting in my car in a McDonald's parking lot on Telegraph Road because I was too ashamed to go home and tell my wife the partnership had dissolved. I thought about every door I'd had to push twice as hard. And then I reached into the inside pocket of my coat. Daniel's hand went to his holster. I pulled out a key. Not a house key, a master key, brushed brass, engraved with a small W for web properties. The key that opened every mechanical room, every utility closet, every rooftop panel in the building. I held it up between two fingers and let him look at it. "I'm not trespassing," I said. "I own this building." The silence that followed had a specific texture, thick and irreversible, the silence of a moment that cannot be walked back. Tyler made a small involuntary sound. Daniels stared at the key, then at my face, then at the key again. The color in his neck began its slow, dark climb upward. "You own—" he started. "The building," I said. "All 12 floors, the retail units on the ground level, the 84 residential apartments above, the parking structure, the roof, the marble floor you're standing on." I picked up my coffee. "Is there anything else you need from me, Officer Daniels?" He opened his mouth and closed it. His face had moved through several shades rapidly and settled on a deep mottled red. "I was doing my job," he said, and the words came out slightly strangled, constructed to sound authoritative, but declining to cooperate. "I understand," I said, and then I walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and stood with my back to him, coffee in one hand and blueprints under my arm. I did not look back, but I heard him behind me telling Tyler in a low voice that he had received a call about a suspicious individual, just following up on a report. I heard Tyler say nothing, and underneath both sounds I heard the unmistakable quality of a lie being assembled in real time. The elevator came. I stepped in. The doors closed. That was the first time. It was not the last. Over the following 2 weeks, Daniels returned to my building 3 more times. I know this not from memory, but from the lobby security footage and from the written log Dominguez began keeping the day I asked him to. Each visit followed the same pattern. Daniels would arrive in the morning, speak at length with whoever was staffed at the desk, and spend between 20 and 40 minutes in the lobby. No report was ever filed. No stated purpose existed beyond the original claim about a suspicious individual, a claim that had dissolved the moment I held up that key. 3 tenants came to Dominguez independently. Jalen and Mia, a young couple on the 4th floor who were both schoolteachers, said Daniels had stopped them one morning and asked for their unit number and how long they'd lived there. Patricia, 71, who had lived in the building before I bought it and who had grown up in Georgia and knew what certain kinds of pressure looked like, told Dominguez flatly, "That man is fishing. I don't know what he's fishing for, but it is not community policing." Amir, a software engineer on 8 who worked from home, reported that on 2 separate mornings he had come down for packages and found Daniels in the lobby watching the elevator bank with what Amir called focused attention. I listened to all of this on a Thursday afternoon in my 10th floor office, the city spread in the windows behind Dominguez, late light going golden across the glass towers in the distance. When he finished, he sat quietly and waited. "Has he come when I'm in the building?" I asked. "Once," Dominguez said. "Last Wednesday. You were in the meeting with the restaurant group on 3. He came in around 10, was at the desk about 15 minutes, and left." "What did he ask about?" Dominguez's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "He asked who owned the building. Tyler gave him your name. He asked if you were there often, what your schedule was like." A pause. "And he asked Tyler whether he had ever seen you do anything that seemed," his word, "irregular." I let that word sit in the room for a moment. Irregular. I had paid $34 million for this building, 8 months in the city's permitting process alone. I personally reviewed every active lease. I employed 16 people directly in this property. I held licenses in 2 states. I had never missed a property tax payment in my professional life. And this officer, with his coffee-stained collar and his hand near his holster, was standing in my lobby asking my temporary security guard whether I seemed irregular. "Carlos," I said, keeping my voice level, "archive all lobby footage from the past 3 weeks. Every visit, every timestamp. Keep the log going. Every time he comes in, who was at the desk, what was said, how long he stayed, which tenants were approached." Dominguez nodded once. He understood what I was building. Not a confrontation. A record. The architecture of a response. After he left, I sat alone while the light outside moved from gold to copper to gray. The building hummed quietly around me. Ventilation. Elevator machinery. The life of 84 apartments going about their ordinary business. I thought about Patricia's word. Fishing. I thought about what, exactly, Daniels believed he was going to catch. And I thought about a man I hadn't spoken to in nearly a year, who had asked me once over bad coffee in a conference room whether I was ready to fight when it came to it. His name was David Park. He was the best civil rights attorney in the state, and I had stored his number in my phone for 3 years under a contact label I had given him when I first saved it. Just in case. I pulled out my phone. I looked at his name on the screen, the office going dark around me, the city moving silently in the glass. I thought about the master key in my jacket pocket. I thought about a man's hand moving toward a holster in my own lobby. Then I pressed call. David Park answered on the second ring. His voice was unhurried, the voice of a man who operated entirely in his own tempo, regardless of external conditions. "Marcus Webb," he said. Not a question. "I was wondering when you'd call." I told him everything. The lobby on Tuesday morning, the holster, the key, the word irregular, the 3 return visits, the tenant complaints, the log Dominguez was keeping. David Park listened without interrupting. He did not perform listening, he simply did it. And when I finished, there was a brief, deliberate silence. "Has he filed any paperwork? Any formal trespass warning? Any report number? Anything in writing?" "Nothing," I said. Dominguez checked the precinct's public log. "No calls placed to this address in the past 3 weeks." "So he's operating off-book," Park said, and his voice had a quality I recognized. The quality of a man who has just been handed exactly what he needs. "Keep the log running. Make sure your footage timestamps are backed up to a second location. And Marcus, next time he comes in, be there if you can. Don't seek a confrontation. Just be present. Let him make his next move." "What do you think his next move is?" A pause. "I think someone told him to make your life inconvenient. Men like Daniels don't invent projects like this on their own. This has the feel of a favor." I sat with that for a long time after we hung up, the office fully dark, the city lit up below me in amber and white. A favor. I turned the word over slowly, examining it the way you examine a structural problem in a building, looking for where the stress is actually originating, rather than where it's showing up. I thought about the corner retail space. I thought about an acquisition offer I had turned down 6 months ago, a lowball bid for the entire building, submitted through an intermediary firm I hadn't been able to trace back to a principal. I had rejected it without a second thought. Now, in the dark of my office, it felt like something else entirely. I pulled up the rejected offer on my laptop. The intermediary was called Cortland Advisory Group. I started searching. It took 40 minutes of patient, methodical work. Cortland Advisory Group was registered in Delaware but operated out of a building 2 blocks from mine. That building was owned by a development LLC called Hartley Urban Partners. The managing partner of Hartley Urban Partners was a man named Raymond Koss, who sat on the board of the city's Downtown Development Authority. The same authority that had approved my building permits, the same authority whose meetings I had attended for 2 years, sitting across the same conference table from Raymond Koss. He had always been polite to me in the specific way of a man who is polite because he considers it strategically efficient, whose pleasantness is a form of overhead, maintained at minimal cost. My hands had gone very still on the keyboard. I felt something that was not quite anger and not quite fear, but colder and more precise than either. A complete crystalline understanding of what had been happening in my lobby and why. Raymond Koss wanted my building, and when I hadn't sold it, he had decided to make my environment hostile enough that I would reconsider. I called David Park back at 8:47 p.m. He answered on the second ring. I read him everything I had found. This time the silence on his end was shorter. "Send it all to me tonight," he said. "And Marcus, don't do anything else until we speak tomorrow. Let me make some calls in the morning." "What kind of calls?" "The kind," Park said quietly, "that people like Raymond Koss don't know, are being made until it's far too late to do anything about them." I sent him the files. Then I put on my coat, took the elevator down through all 12 floors of my building, and walked out into the cold March night. I walked the 2 blocks to my car without hurrying, my breath making small clouds in the air. The city moved around me. A group of people outside a restaurant, a delivery truck double parked with its hazard lights going, the ordinary commerce of an ordinary weeknight. I sat in my car for a few minutes before starting the engine, my hands on the wheel, looking at nothing in particular. I thought about my grandmother and the smell of lemon disinfectant. I thought about 2011 and the McDonald's parking lot, and the particular quality of shame that comes from feeling like you are losing something you were never quite supposed to have. I thought about Patricia pressing my hands between hers, and the word she had used, fishing. And I thought about my building, standing 2 blocks away in the cold city night, marble and glass and sandstone, every window lit from inside with the warm, ordinary life of people going about their evenings. Then I started the engine and drove home. David Park called at 8:52 the next morning. He had spoken to a journalist at the Tribune's Metro desk who had been working on a piece about racial profiling patterns in commercial real estate for 8 months and was very interested in my situation. He had also been contacted by a former officer in Daniels's precinct with concerns about Daniels's conduct, who was willing to make a statement. And at 8 that morning, Park had filed a formal complaint with the department's Internal Affairs Division. "How long before Daniels knows?" I asked. "Internal Affairs notifies his supervisor today, which means Daniels knows by noon, which means—" "He'll come in," I said. "Almost certainly. And when he does, I want to be there." He was there. Not visibly. David Park was not a man who made entrances, but he was in the second-floor conference room with his briefcase and his yellow legal pad when Officer Daniels walked through the lobby doors at 11:17 that morning. I was standing at the reception desk talking to Dominguez. The log was open on the desk. The security camera was recording to 2 backup locations in real time, which I had verified myself before coming down. Daniels stopped when he saw me. A small stop, barely perceptible but absolutely there. The fractional hesitation of a man who had planned a move and found the board rearranged. "Mr. Webb," he said, his voice careful now, recalibrated. "Didn't expect to find you here." "I'm here most mornings," I said. "It's my building." He moved toward the desk. He was in uniform, which meant this was technically an on-duty visit, which meant it would appear in his duty log and be visible to the supervisor who had received Park's complaint a few hours earlier. I watched him process the geometry of the situation. The camera above the desk, Dominguez with the open log, my complete and utter stillness. "I wanted to clarify something," he said, "about my visits here. There had been some complaints from residents, and I was following up." "Which residents?" I asked. A pause. "I'm not at liberty to say. I've spoken to every resident in this building in the past 2 weeks," I said. "The only complaints about anyone in this lobby were about you. I have their statements in writing." "One beat. I also have the duty log from your precinct for the past 3 weeks, which shows no calls placed to this address, which means your visits here were not dispatched, which means they were personal." The lobby was very quiet. Somewhere above us the building went about its life. Footsteps on the 4th floor, the distant chime of an elevator. Daniel stood at the reception desk, and I watched the last of his composure do its slow, inevitable work of coming apart. "I think there may have been some misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," I said. My voice was quiet and level, and it was the quietness that landed hardest. "I know why you were here. I know who asked you to be here. And by the time you get back to your precinct today, the people who asked for this favor will be having a conversation they did not plan to have." He stared at me. His jaw was tight, the muscle working faintly at the hinge. Behind him, through the glass doors, Jalen and Mia were coming up the steps. They slowed when they saw the scene inside, then came through anyway and stood near the entrance, watching quietly. "You can leave now," I said. "Or you can stay, and David Park can come down from the 2nd floor, and we can have a much longer conversation. Your choice." The silence stretched for 3 full seconds. Daniels looked at me, at the camera, at Jalen and Mia near the door, back at me. He said nothing. He turned and walked out through the glass doors without another word, and the lobby held its breath for a moment, and then Mia quietly began to clap. One small, solitary sound. And then Jalen joined, and then Dominguez, and then I raised one hand and they stopped, because this was not over, and I needed everyone, including myself, to understand that clearly. The Tribune piece ran 3 weeks later, on a Sunday morning. 1,100 words on the front of the Metro section. Patterns of intimidation. How one developer's building became a target. Christine Voss, sharp and methodical, 14 years at the paper, had traced Cortland Advisory Group back to Raymond Koss with 2 additional layers of documentation I hadn't found myself. She had also spoken to 3 other black property owners in the downtown corridor who had received lowball offers from Cortland in the past 4 years. 2 had eventually sold. One of them, Dolores Bryant, who owned a 6-story building on the east side of the district, told Voss on the record, "I felt like the ground kept shifting under me. I didn't understand why until now." The internal affairs investigation concluded in 6 weeks. Daniels received a formal written reprimand and was transferred to a different precinct. His commander told a local outlet that the department was reviewing its protocols for off-book community engagement. The language was careful and institutional and said exactly nothing, which I had expected. But the reprimand was permanent. The transfer was real. David Park filed a civil suit on behalf of myself and 2 other property owners Voss had identified. A suit that resolved 18 months later in a settlement whose terms I couldn't disclose, but which Park described, when we shook hands on the courthouse steps, as sufficient. Raymond Koss resigned from the Downtown Development Authority in the 4th week after the piece ran. His company lost 2 institutional investors in the following month. The acquisition offer for my building was never repeated. That was 11 months ago. This morning I arrived at 7:40, 3 minutes earlier than on that Tuesday in March. The lobby was exactly as I had designed it. The Portuguese marble, the walnut desk, the 18-foot ceiling with its warm recessed light. Dominguez was already at his desk. He looked up when I came through the glass doors and gave me a nod. The particular nod of a man who has been through something with you and has no need to mention it. Patricia was still on the 2nd floor. She had renewed her lease for 2 more years. A few weeks after everything concluded, she had stopped me in the lobby and pressed my hand between both of hers and said quietly, "Your grandmother would be proud." I had not been able to speak for a moment. I had just nodded, and she had nodded back. And that had been enough. I took the elevator up to 10, made coffee, stood at the window and watched the city come fully into the day. Trucks and pedestrians, light moving across the glass towers in the distance. Somewhere in a different precinct, Daniels was beginning his shift. Somewhere 2 blocks away, Raymond Koss had an office he no longer occupied. And here, in this building, my building, every beam and bolt and square foot of marble, the ordinary life of 84 apartments was going about its morning. I reached into my jacket pocket and turned the master key over slowly in my fingers. Brushed brass, the small engraved W. I had thought about putting it in a drawer after everything ended, as a kind of symbolic putting to rest. I had decided not to. It stayed in my pocket, where it had always been, not as a reminder of what happened, as a reminder of what it meant to hold something this hard-won and know, with complete certainty, that it was yours. I set down my coffee. The restaurant group had finally agreed on lease terms. There were drawings to review on the 6th floor. Dominguez had a maintenance question about 9 that I had been meaning to get to for weeks. Ordinary work, the best kind. I picked up my blueprints, tucked them under my arm, and went to do it.